Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about some of the best guns of how to improve your aim for newcomers and for those that are definitely a little bit more seasoned, and what guns you should be picking up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the racks. We're going to talk about them from best to worst in terms of aim and how to improve, and we're just gonna, it's gonna be very high level. I know I've broken down all of these guns in more detailed guides, but I figured an overall guide to kind of help you out in terms of your weapon selection choice if you have the option of multiple on the floor and what decisions you should make. So if you're new to the game, the most obvious one to grab is definitely going to be the Mastiff. The Mastiff is a lot more effective in terms of helping you out overall with your aim comparatively towards the Mozambique and the EVA 8. The reason why is whenever you shoot, notice how it shoots in more of a horizontal pattern there. So it kind of gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of landing your shots. Obviously, whenever you're closer to a target, you're going to be able to land them more. And the reason why, it makes a lot more sense why originally they put, and we'll cover the crate weapons at the very end here, why they put the PK next to the EVA 8 is that the PK was ideally supposed to be a more improved EVA 8, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So if you're new to the game, get used to the Mastiff. The Mastiff is definitely your best friend. Don't hesitate to grab it. I can't tell how many times I've died to individuals with the Mastiff, even if they're kind of whiffing their shots and just kind of shooting in a general vicinity. Even if you miss, at least you're doing damage. Notice how I'm clearly missing, and I'm still doing a little damage. So there's definitely a benefit to using the Mastiff. I'm not saying that it's an easy weapon. I'm just letting you know that there's definitely a lot more opportunities in terms of learning and understanding shotguns in this game. Now, obviously, we're going to talk about the EVA 8. So if you look at its shooting pattern, notice how it's not the star pattern that you saw before, but it's more of a circle. So you can't really aim for headshots with this, which can be confusing for newcomers to Apex. You really have to kind of aim at center mass. And you really can't miss because it is more of a circle. So even if you kind of miss to the side, you're really going to be doing nothing comparatively to the Mastiff. So grab the Mastiff over the EVA 8 as you become better and you understand more of the EVA 8. As we just discussed, this is definitely a great weapon. Just the issue is that his damage output is fantastic and can really just destroy somebody, but it lacks, I don't know, it's just not as comfortable, especially for, I've seen noobs like try to aim down sights with this, and whenever you aim down sights, obviously you're like, oh, I'm gonna aim for the head. Really, it's better to hit fire this thing. Just because you're not inclined to lean up top, you gotta aim center mass to really maximize on the damage. And of course, if you're new, avoid the Mozambique. I know it may be tempting to grab, especially with hammer points, but the reality is, and they try to buff it to kind of put it more in line, but you really have to land those single shots. And notice how it's more of a 3-star kind of pattern there. So it's really not ideal for newcomers. If you aim for the head, it's perfect and does quite a bit of damage, but if you just lack all accuracy as a new player, you really don't want to use this gun. So let's move on to energy weapons. So energy weapons, you know the plus side, and this happens to be a happy coincidence in terms of easiest to hardest or best to worst. It happens to go right to left. Same instance, kind of opposite end here, from worst to best. I would say if you're new, you can definitely grab either the Volt or the Devotion. We'll cover why you don't want to grab the Havoc or the L-Star in just a bit, but if you're new to the game, you can just definitely just kind of mouse one to win. With the Devotion is really, really strong. And I understand for newcomers it can be very overwhelming, but keep in mind that while it has a lot of recoil, you are just spamming a lot of bullets and just like overwhelmingly a large amount. So when a lot of pros kind of meme and say, you know, it's mouse one to win, it really can feel like it's mouse one to win just because you're just spraying and praying. Now, the next gun to really utilize out of the energy weapons is the Volt. So say for at least this definitely helps a lot with newcomers to Apex as well. Pros use it a lot as well. Keep that in mind. It's a fantastic weapon. There's been the long old debate now of the R99 versus the Volt. I'll kind of get into that discussion once we talk about the R99 later down the road on that angle over there. But when we talk about the Devo versus the Volt, obviously if you grab Rampart, she has a faster reload, which is nice. You can see here. I know I am recommended to unlock Rampart last, but if you happen to just be a massive LMG fan, well then the Devotion is really not a bad weapon to kind of get comfortable with, right? So now, the Volt is a great second option, honestly, for most. It's going to be your first pick, especially even if you're a well-seasoned player. Now, the reason why is that if we look at the Havoc, Havoc has a lot of horizontal recoil right off the rip, and I know I've covered all this in guides a lot more in depth talking about the weapons. Again, this is a high overview. So if you notice, there's a lot of horizontal, and also the ramp up time. The Volt doesn't have a ramp up time, which can help, so if you're kind of taking an angle, just for those that are new, you need to ramp up then shoot. If you do the opposite and just start shooting, look how much time it took before I can actually do damage. And if you're and you have an enemy who's utilizing an R301, a Mastiff, anything, they're going to get instant damage on you. And before you really can get any shots off, you're pretty much lost. So that ramp up time takes time to learn. And while I'm recommending the Devo first, it's mostly just because of how many bullets it has and the fact that you really can't lose with this weapon, especially in close range. At a distance, you'll never be firing this at a distance, but you'll learn in time to control the recoil. It's a great entry weapon in my humble opinion. Now, the L-Star has gotten a lot better in terms of its flashiness. As you can tell, it's a little bit better, but the issue is that the bullet velocity is quite slow on the L-Star, and while it does a lot of damage, it's much more effective. Much more effective to grab the Volt or the Devo over the L-Star. And of course, if you're Rampart, then you get the added benefit of the L-Star, but you don't really see a whole lot of people run the L-Star. It's not a bad weapon by any means. Definitely a good weapon. But don't really recommend grabbing it if you're new to the game. Even if you're seasoned, when you see L-Star versus the Volt that's fully kitted, you're going to grab the Volt instantly. You won't even hesitate and won't even second guess it. So now, moving on. From easiest to hardest, the triple take Terries. So triple take Terry, I always joke around. This is like practically a shotgun, honestly. This is such a easy entry-level weapon to kind of get started with, is the triple take. It's just, because it's spread, you can use it like a shotgun. It's just really nice. You could just fire this for days and just shoot people. It's a great alternative even to the Mastiff, to be honest, because it has a horizontal spread. When you shoot it, you see it's got a horizontal spread. So if you're close range, it can definitely do some work. So it really acts both as a sniper and a shotgun. And of course, when you charge it up, there's a bit of ramp up time there. But when you really get that shot laid in, it does a lot of damage. And obviously, you get a lot of this number for those that are interested in that meme. So good damage on the front of the triple take. Now, if you're starting to get more comfortable with your accuracy, I definitely recommend the longbow. The reason why I'm going to talk about these and why I don't really recommend them right off the rip, we'll get into in just a hot second. Obviously, the rate of fire is nice. You can stay scoped in on this gun, and we'll cover some of the distances when I talk about the Kraber at the very end of the video, comparing this, and also do a guide later for you guys talking about sniping and how to improve. But right now, we're just talking high level, what weapons to grab. Obviously, you can stay scoped in. Notice that the rate of fire is definitely nice. You don't have to worry about the charge shot. The reason why I recommend the triple take first is because it's just so noob friendly and so much easier to use. And it's definitely forgiving even if you miss your shot just because of that bullet spread and you have like 3 bullets to shoot comparatively to 1. Even if the damage is lower, any damage done is going to be better than just missing altogether. But of course, the longbow is definitely a great weapon to utilize. Now, if we talk about the charge rifle next, the reason why I wasn't going out of my way to say this is the most noob friendly, it is hit scan, mind you. The issue that I see with a lot of noobs is that they struggle to get the max damage on the charge rifle. If you're in any way, shape, or form seasoned at all in first-person shooters, then the minor tracking required is going to be relatively easy. But if you're new, then it's going to be a struggle to make sure you maximize on all that damage. So that's just something to be mindful of. If you're new to Apex, you're still just getting used to how a weapon really works. Adding an extra mechanic of charging up and everything is not going to be necessarily comfortable. And of course, the reason why I saved the Sentinel for last, while you can still stay scoped in, notice the rate of fire is much slower than the longbow. This does a lot more damage, so you just have to be a lot more accurate. You see this not as much in competitive play, just because you're looking for more consistent and fast damage. And it just takes a little time to get used to the Sentinel. It's a lot of fun. I love the bolt action. I used to dislike it a lot more at the start. I've definitely got a lot more comfortable with it as time has persisted. So don't hesitate to grab the Sentinel, practice with this. And we're going to talk about this at the very end when you compare the Sentinel with the Kraber and how to get more comfortable overall with your aim. So let's move on. Let us move on to the heavy weapons. So when we look at the heavy weapons here, something to notate is that the easiest gun realistically to utilize, just because of the large mag, is going to be the Spitfire. I don't necessarily recommend this to just use as a crutch. But if you have absolutely struggle with in terms of your overall aim and accuracy, and you just struggle with the recoil, the Spitfire is not bad. Of course, keep in mind you're going to want to put a sight on it because it definitely obstructs the view quite a bit. But the mag size is extremely large and monumental to kind of deny, especially for those that are newcomers, and especially if you're using Rampart. As you can tell, I mean, you could just kind of spray and pray and not have to worry. Just keep shooting, 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 shooting. So that's really nice. Now, the next gun I recommend over the Spitfire is the Hemlock. Now, once you at least understand your aim and get comfortable, is that the Hemlock is overpowered. As you could just tell, the difference in terms of the overall time to knock somebody there. So if we were to compare and you had a noob run up on you with an LMG and they're spraying, look how much time it took versus somebody who comparatively, boom, dead. 2 seconds, literally 2 seconds comparatively to not even 2 seconds. Granted, if you headshot with all of the Spitfire, yeah, you'll knock them a lot more. You have to keep in mind that the burst of the Hemlock is just stupidly overpowered. It's really good. So you can't sleep on this, even if you're new to the game. Don't be afraid to pick up the Hemlock. The Hemlock is really good. I would be surprised if it's not a great weapon by the next season. So I definitely recommend utilizing this gun and putting a lot more time into it. Now, as you get better and you want a little variety, a little different taste, the Hemlock is definitely still better than the Flatline, but the Flatline is still one of my favorites. I really like the Flatline. The issue is that the time to kill, even with the Flatline, as you can tell, is still not as good. It's definitely good, but it's just no Hemlock, right? If you had a Hemlock, then the Hemlock is just going to shred, and that's kind of why individuals have been asking for a nerf on the Hemlock. It's just really too good to deny. Now, we're talking high risk, high reward. If you're new to the game, do not grab the Wingman until you feel comfortable with your single shots. If you go into a fight, the biggest issue you're going to run into here is the fact that if you miss, you're missing on a lot of damage, and honestly, probably going to lose the fight. So don't worry about grabbing the Wingman at the start. It's definitely better than grabbing a P2020 or an RE45, that's for sure. But make sure you find, there's plenty of other guns that we just covered it. And when you're looting, there's definitely going to be alternatives to feeling a lot more comfortable. The issue, again, when you're utilizing the Wingman is just that if you miss, you're going to struggle. And of course, if you're more of a seasoned player, pick up the Wingman. High risk, high reward. Definitely the Hemlock is still a lot more nasty comparatively. So if we 3 shots pretty quick and we wait for this to kind of appear again, how much faster somebody will go down. The Hemlock still will beast them if they land all headshots. But from a distance, obviously you're trying to get your shots on. The plus side with the Hemlock is you can put a 3x on it even. It's just really, really good. So as a new player, Spitfire, unless you can actually aim, then grab yourself a Hemlock and improve your aim. Then for fun, for a different flavor, Flatline, but still you're definitely going to struggle, unfortunately, with the Flatline. Just because it's time to kill. Still really good nonetheless. And then work your way up to Wingman. Now, let's move on to light weapons. Now, for a light weapon, you don't want to ever really have an RE or a P2020. For a newcomer, even if you're seasoned, the RE45, if you don't have an option, the RE45, I mean, it's going to be better than, I guess, punching somebody. The issue with the RE45 is just the damage and time to kill. Definitely takes a little bit too long, and you need to extend the mag. It's just great as a gun off rip, but ideally you want to get this out of your hands as fast as humanly possible and find alternative weapons. Even if you're shooting with the hammer points, this is a great weapon for more of a seasoned player. You want to grab the alternator. Preferably, if it's on the ground. If you saw all 3 of these guns on the ground, you're going to want to grab an alternator over these 2. The alternator at least provides a consistent amount of damage, definitely a lot more damage overall when getting into a gunfight at the start. Now, ideally, when you find a light weapon, you're going more into endgame, you're going to want to grab an either R301, R99, or G7 for the light weapons. Let's talk about those. So, if you are new, the R301 is going to be much better for you than the R99. So let's talk about that. Why is that? Well, first off, it's going to be the recoil. So if we shoot with the R301, notice the rate of fire, and notice the recoil difference. Obviously, the R99 has way more recoil, but it also has a faster rate of fire. The R301, even though I recommend it for those that are still adjusting to the game, the R301 is still a disgusting, amazing gun to utilize, especially with the 3X. It's just, I mean, I only have a barrel on this, and it's extremely easy to control and really fry from a distance, so you cannot sleep on the R301. So while I'm telling you it's quote-unquote easier, I'm just giving you more of an entry-level comparison. Like if you're trying to shoot something from a distance with the R301, you have to a little worry about that, obviously, spread that you see. It's a much better control there of the R99. Again, I have a guide on this, but nonetheless, just something to be mindful of, the difference between these two guns. Now, the G7. Ideally, you would love to get a 3X on this, or 2x4, or any sort of scope on it, because the reason why is that once you remove the scope, the irons are horrible. And for a newcomer who's trying to have a nice sight, you don't want to grab yourself a G7 unless you can grab a 1X or 2X, 3X, anything. You want to find a sight on this so you can see your targets better. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle with this gun. And I promise you over time you will get better with the G7. The G7 used to be a lot more mandatory of a gun, just partly because at a distance it can fry. And when you're landing shots, it can really, as you can tell compared to like the Hemlock, it just does a lot of damage. It's been nerfed a lot. It's had a lot of adjustments, and it's in a better place now. You still see individuals triple take Terry it up over the G7 just because even if you miss, it still lands a shot and it's very rewarding, right? So again, we'll cover each of the guns really quick, and then we'll cover the ending guns. So just as a reminder, try to avoid picking up an RE or P2020 unless you have no choice. If you're new, R301 is definitely a more comfortable weapon than the R99. Alternatively, no pun intended, the alternator, if you don't find any of these guns or any of the other guns we mentioned before, the alternator is not bad. And then as you become more seasoned, the G7 Scout has amazing potential and is a fantastic close range and even long range weapon at times. I know I mentioned close range there, and the reason why is that it still has a lot of damage output. Again, for heavy weapons, Hemlock is a fantastic starter if you're really struggling, you just don't even know what you're doing. The Spitfire, just because it's got a large ammo count, so you can't really go wrong with that. And then of course, Flatline for a different flavor, Wingman as you start to really improve, and high risk, high reward. Even if you become seasoned, the Wingman, when you're in endgame and you're competing for a lot of money, is definitely a high risk when you start talking about triple take Terries. Easy, simple weapon to utilize, especially when you're getting used to snipers because of the spread. Go to longbow, and then for different flavors, utilize these guns. And we're going to come back to this in just a hot second. Grab the Volt or the Devo to mouse 1 to win. The Volt as you become more seasoned and start to get comfortable. And even if you are pretty seasoned, comfortable, the Volt is not a bad thing. The L-Star you want to get out of your hands, ideally. Then the Havoc has way too much horizontal right now, unless you grab a turbocharger. Then honestly, it's kind of up in the air between a Havoc for a Volt, but if you're new, avoid these two guns. Then if you're new, you really need to have always a Massive, which is why I started with these guns over here. And then let's talk about the crate weapons. Just a reminder, avoid those if you're new. So now, crate weapons. PK, as we talked about, more in the star shape. This is practically a shotgun at a distance, as you can tell. It does a massive amount of damage. You should pick it up even if you're new to the game. Don't be intimidated just because these weapons are in the crate. Doesn't mean that they're more difficult. In fact, it just means that they're actually easier, in my opinion, to utilize. Even the Prowler. You pretty much get every single attachment. You have everything around the rip. The burst on the Hemlock is still more powerful, in my opinion, than the Prowler, but at least you have the alternative to a auto fire. And the auto fire is really not that bad to control, to be honest. So don't hesitate to pick up the Prowler, even if you see it. If you have a Volt or R99 or any of those guns, I mean, the Prowler is still, it's a different flavor. But if you're new, don't get intimidated by it. If there's any gun to maybe get intimidated, maybe is the Kraber. Obviously, if you land your shot, you do a massive amount of damage. It can be really nice. Even if you run up to somebody and try to hip fire, it can be really nice as well, right? Don't hesitate to pick up the Kraber. It takes a little time to get used to, and that's what I was going to talk about with the Sentinel versus the Kraber. And we can talk about sniping just a little bit here at the very end. Something to be mindful of is that snipers have bullet velocity if you look there. Bullet drop and bullet velocity, both. So obviously I put my crosshairs dead center. You're going to have to aim a little bit further above just to land your shot. The same thing with a Sentinel. You have to aim a little further ahead. So the reason why I'm talking about the Sentinel and the Kraber, one-on-one here, is that realize with the Kraber, I'm gonna shoot real quick. You shoot, it's gonna unscope you. At least it's a bolt action. You start to kind of get used to your shots. Something to notice that the Sentinel, it does, you know, it doesn't zoom you out. I zoom myself out right there, but it still has to go through the bolt action animation. Here, the, you know, takes a second there. So if you're gonna practice some of your Kraber and you want a little bit faster rate of fire, if you can shoot a Sentinel comfortably, I'm confident you can shoot a Kraber confidently. Now, obviously, the reason why I recommend the longbow for newcomers is notice how fast it shoots without having any sort of animation, right? So don't hesitate to grab a Kraber, come in here, practice it a little bit. I promise you're gonna feel a lot more comfortable with it in time. So just give yourself time. You'll miss, it's only natural. Get used to the bullet velocity, shoot a target from far away. Get used to hitting those targets. Same thing with a longbow, even though I showed a faster rate of fire, you still have to aim higher to hit. Notice how the crosshair is way above at a distance. And even the same thing for the charger rifle. Don't be fooled. I mean, there's barely any arc, to be honest. It's hit scan, but they lower the damage. I don't use the charge rifle as much, mostly because I can land my shots with the other weapons. But it's because notice how the damage is a lot lower on that. And then, of course, a triple take is still good. Also has bullet drop as well, just to be mindful. I will cover this more in depth on a sniping guide, which I'll release soon, and we'll talk about. But again, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Hopefully this video was helpful. Any support on the channel means a whole lot, and it goes a long way helping other people find this channel, guides, tutorials. I love aim training, talking about stuff. I spent a lot of time in here in the test range just shooting stuff, and I guess you could say I just really enjoy aim improvement and everything. But again, I really appreciate all of you guys. This was all done in one big take as we talk about everything. So hopefully that kind of highlights a nice personal conversation as we talk about every single gun, but also highlights that hopefully I know a little bit of what I'm talking about, that I can just sit down and talk with you guys. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.